to turn red. Okay. Today we're going to do a demo on turning a lidded box with two different woods. And we're going to start with 3x3 blank, and this one happens to be mahogany. And this is a 2.5 by 2.5 by 2.5 piece of walnut. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to square it off and develop your centers on both your pieces of wood. On your base piece, we want to orientate it so that the side grain is running in this direction with our holes, with our centers on right in here. On your top, you want it, though, you don't want the end grain to be on the top of your piece. You want the top of your piece to be side grain. So the bottom is turned end grain, the top is turned side grain, just so it finishes out better. So what I did to kind of speed things up, because there's nothing like watching somebody turn something from squared around. So I already turned it from squared around. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to cut a tenon on this end here, and I'm going to turn about a 1/4 inch tenon on here. And this is going to be so I can reverse this and put it in this chuck right here. So I know that this chuck, when it's closed, I need a tenon of this will be an approximation, but this will be good enough. So I'll turn this down with a parting tool. And I'm going to use a diamond parting tool for this. If you use your calipers while this is running, it's okay, but one thing you got to be sure you do is you take a file or something and you round these points off, because you don't want the points to catch. And on this, I didn't have to square this end because this tenon is not going to be deeper than my chuck. So this edge here, which I need to go back and hit real quick, is going to sit flat on the chuck jaw. This is mahogany, so it's pretty strong. Now I'm going to take my parting tool again, and I'm just going to clean this up. Okay. Okay, so the next thing I got to do is we're going to cut a recess on the base to accept this chuck here, and we're going to expand it. And usually when I do this, I also try to do some little decoration to the base. I hate to see just a flat surface there. Now there's numerous ways to mark this, but I use a set of dividers, and I adjust these to the diameter of the chuck body. Pretty close. It's better to be too small than too big. And you can do this with a compass if you don't feel comfortable using the divider on a spinning piece of wood here. What we're going to do, we want this to be right about on center. We're going to take the dividers, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to stick the left one into the wood to mark it, and I'm going to see if it lines up with the right one. And if I do, I'm pretty close. And I think that will do it. You can use all kinds of different tools. You could use a parting tool if you wanted to make this indentation in here for your chuck. I just happen to have a small square scraper that I kind of use for this. And I want it to cut right about dead on center. If I need to put my shoes on. Check it. And it's a little small. That'll be fine. Now at this point, it's kind of like courage. How deep do I need to make this recess where I feel comfortable that this won't fly off when I'm hollowing it out? I tend to err on the side of confidence or depth. Alright, so I've got my recess, and now I'm going to take the center and I'm going to reduce the thickness. A little bit. So I want this just to be a little bit thinner than the base, just so when I get it all sanded that it can't hit the surface. And I'll have a wobbling box. I usually like to put some kind of a decorative line or something in there, and this just happens to be a carbide detail tool. You could use a skew, you could use anything you want. I'm just going to put a line in there. Pretty good. Now at this point, I would go ahead and sand this from 80 up through 320 and get this all nice and cleaned up. So I'm going to put this on, and I'm going to expand this out. Well, shoot. Thank you. Okay, so at this point here, I'm going to try and use the tailstock when I can here, just because it gives me a little more security when I'm going to cut the tenon off. I hope this is self-ejecting. You don't have a knockout lock. All right. I said there wasn't anything. Okay, that's all right, since I already did some of this at home. Okay, so the next step would be we would mount, I prefer to drill this out as much as possible because it saves a lot of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount this into the tail, my drill chuck into the tailstock. I'm going to get the proper size Forstner bit that I want to use for this. And then I'm going to take ruler, and I'm going to figure out that my recess is approximately 1/4 inch. I want the depth in the bottom to be approximately 1/4 inch, and you got to be sure and allow for the spur on the end of your Forstner bit, which is approximately 3/16. So we're going to allow another 1/4. So 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to take my Forstner bit and I'm going to measure back 3/4 of an inch. So I got 3/4 here. So I need my hole to be right at 2 inches. So I'll take my Forstner and I use a dry erase marker and I put it on here and I mark this at 2 inches, and then I'm going to drill it in to the 2-inch mark, and that'll give me enough wood left in the bottom to finish everything out. The nice thing about the dry erase marker is, of course, it comes right off. I wasn't sure how good this lathe would be for actually drilling a hole, so I did that ahead of time. So here's one here where I've already drilled a hole in there, and I actually sanded off the bottom. So I'm going to mount this in here. Okay. Now normally, if I had a bar to eject this, I would put this in the tailstock, and I would run this cone in here just for extra support while I'm going to shape the outside. Well, we don't have that luxury tonight, so we're going to use it as we can. So I'm going to use, at least to start with, I'm going to use a spindle gouge to start my shape. And I'll be the first to admit that I'm not very good with a spindle gouge. So what I basically would use is a scraper. So I'm going to use the scraper to refine my shape. And of course, when you use a scraper, you always want it orientated in this position off the tool rest. And you're only going to cut with the little burr that's on here. And this is mahogany, so the burr should last a while. If you had really hard wood, the burr may last 20 seconds and you have to go back. And I think that would be a pretty acceptable shape. So I would sand the outside of this, starting at 80 and go up through 320. And I got a piece of neoprene here that I use on the sandpaper. And the sandpaper has sponge back. For those of you who've never used this foam back sandpaper, once you use it, never use anything else again. Came out pretty good. At home I would have an air compressor, and I know that's one thing I did forget tonight, to bring a piece of tubing, so we'll use it as we can. Okay, this doesn't have that much of a curve. You could get in there with a gouge of some kind, or you might be able to use some kind of a really super small scraper that you may be able to get in there with. My tool of choice is definitely going to be this little carbide tool. For this radius here, I only need to use one tool to do the whole piece. And I got this laser contraption last February at the woodworking show, and if I can use a laser, I will, because it certainly helps me do my work. So the laser basically sets up, and we set the laser off to the side. In this case, it's about 3/16 or so. So that'll give me 3/16 of an inch wall thickness. This way I don't have to keep going back and forth and checking the wall thickness with a caliper or anything like that. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tool, and because it's going to pull, So the closer you get to the edge, the longer the line gets. Shorter and goes up the bowl, you know, to get away with that. This is only the second time I've used it, and the light goes off every once in a while. At home I would have an air compressor so you can constantly keep blowing this out, because every time you cut, centrifugal force throws it against the side. You wind up cutting the dust. Now I can feel as long as the light stays on. It's pretty consistent up to that point, and I've run into the bottom. So once I'm into the bottom, if I'm going to continue to use the laser, I then have to put the laser out to the front. Move this out. Doesn't have to be anything exacting, but the accuracy of these tools with the laser is pretty amazing. You can pretty easily do wall thicknesses of a 1/16 of an inch and feel pretty comfortable that you're not going to go through the piece of wood. So now all I got to do is go across the bottom, and I'm going to take the lid away so that I can get down to take the spur point out. With the blade of the carbide tool, you can pretty much always feel exactly what you got left in the bottom. And I think for right now, we're going to stop right there. Since I don't have an air compressor, and I didn't bring a tube, I'm not going to sand the inside, but for sanding the inside, what I found works really good is I have a pair of really long nose pliers, and I cut my sandpaper up into little pads, grab it like that on the end of the sandpaper, and I can put this in, and I can work that across the back. And then it'll also fold the paper down when you get to the bottom, and it'll sand the bottom at the same time. You can work all your papers just like that, all the way up to 320 grit. Yeah, could use the tool rest to be even better. So that's actually pretty decent. Could have spent a little more time on it and got it perfect, but the wall thicknesses are pretty uniform, and I could have taken any little ridge out of there with the sandpaper pretty easy. And we didn't go through the bottom. Well, I don't have to. I'll use ours. Okay. So here's my top, and I've already turned it round. Right center. So we're going to do the same thing we did for the base. We're going to put a tenon on here that we'll put on in the number 2 jaws. Okay. So we're going to face this off. Okay, so then we're going to cut the tenon to slide into for the lid. And we just want to get close so we don't have to do this too many times. So we'll try to get it right about there. Make a quick check. Okay, we're in good shape. We didn't cut too far. Alright, so what you want to do is you want to try and sneak up on this. And then it's up to you. Some people like their boxes to have a really hard fit on the lid where it pops. I just don't happen to be one of those people. If I want to pick something up out of the box, I want to be able to open the lid without having to be two-handed. So, okay, to me that's a good fit for what I want. It doesn't wiggle back and forth, but you can pick it off with one hand. Okay, so what I want to do though, I don't want the lid to be flat. I want the lid to be recessed so that when it fits over this, it goes down the sides. So I'm going to take skew, and I want my skew to cut just about on center. So I'm going to take my skew and I start from the edge and I'm going to undercut, and I'm going to push it in and then up. I think that's going to be pretty good, right about there. So then the next thing is, okay, how big of a lid do I want? And I certainly don't want it quite that big, so I'm going to start taking some of the lid away. And I'll just use the parting tool for this, doesn't really matter. think I want it to be a little thinner. And I can shape this at the same time. You can use a spindle gouge. And I can use this to start shaping the lid. Okay. So I think this is about the total height of the lid, right about in here. So I'm just going to make a mark with my parting tool. Okay. So next thing we want to do, we're going to cut a recess into the lid. And I don't know how many of you took the lid off, but Cindy Drozda always said anytime you make a box and a woman might get it, you put a stone in it. So it's just one piece of a pierced earring in there. Okay. So I'm going to go back to this little cutting tool, this little scraper. And I'm going to cut a recess that's going to fit these little pin jaws here so that I'll have a way to put these jaws on the chuck so I can finish the outside and get it all sanded up and everything. And we'll do the same thing. We'll measure these. Mark this. We'll make this recess. And this one I'll just make flat. And you can do anything you want to these lids as far as anything you might think that you might want to try and decorate it or something. I always like to have some kind of eye appeal to any of these things. So at this point here, we're going to slow the lathe down. Just run up through the grits here pretty quick. One thing to be aware of, that walnut is pretty prevalent around here. You can get a lot of walnut, and walnut's a pretty nice wood to work with, except if you know that you're going to finish your walnut with a Beal buff system, after you get done sanding up through probably 220, you probably want to go back and apply sanding sealer to the whole thing, let it completely dry, and resand it. Because walnut is a pretty open grained wood, and what happens is on the Beal buff it has one of the bars is white, and you can wind up with that white rouge getting in the spaces on your project, which is not pretty, and then you wind up trying to get it out. Where if you go ahead and don't worry, you apply sanding sealer, you don't have that problem. One question I do get a lot is, how fast do you turn stuff? And that's a pretty common question, and my usually answer is that I turn it as fast as I feel comfortably safe with it, and usually for me that's faster than most people turn, but I tend to like to turn things a little higher RPM because I think it cuts better. One thing I really hate doing is changing jaws. That's why I have numerous ones already set up. One thing you have to always be aware of is when you're expanding into a recess is how much wood you have left. Some woods do not support very well, and you can wind up cracking the piece of wood if you don't have a lot of wood there left for support. Alright, so let's see here. Try using the spindle gouge a little bit here. And you will always find as you become a turner, doesn't matter if you're left-handed or right-handed, you'll eventually learn to be both. Ooh, we have a lot of tear out for some reason. So let's see what we can do here. tend to use a scraper in a lot of different directions. I don't think there's any really thing wrong with using it on the outside even of a bowl or any other object. Some people say you're not supposed to, but I kind of look at the end results, and if that's what it's going to take for me to get it done, then I'm certainly going to do that. If you make this edge really sharp, you need to kind of just dull it a little bit with the 320 right at the end. So with my recess in the back, I can come back when I get home, and I can come back and put this on the lathe, and I can completely refinish it if I need to. So it's pretty close.
Craig, are you going to load this on YouTube?
Try to. I did the first one, so I'm going to try to get this on there hopefully the next week or so and get that on there.
Yeah.